Good morning. So today I want to talk about involving parents in the treatment process and just a trend. I say this tactfully. I felt so rude when I was some of the things I put in there about stop blaming parents. The thing is, though, and it's not my intention to be rude, and it's also in my mind, it's really important as mental health professionals who specialize in working with children and adolescents to really conceptualize children and adolescents within their family framework. Because there's a trend that I've noticed, um, and I've been doing this over 30 years. And prior to that, I worked with children in special education. So I go back all the way to the mid 1980s, working with children and their families in different capacities because I have always, since I was little, wanted to help children. I, I thought everybody knew what they wanted to do when they were little. But apparently that's not really the case. And for me, it was. I've always known I wanted to help children. I didn't exactly know what that meant or what that would look like. And so I started my journey originally in the special education field, working with children with emotion problems, which gave me access to really working with children and their families in a variety of capacities. And then what I realized was I really wanted to do the mental health side of it. And so then I went in that direction. That being said, though, um, it's really about, as mental health professionals, how are we conceptualizing the work with children, and if our focus is primarily just on the children, then we have a tendency in the mental health field, and I'll say this even in the special education field, we have a tendency when things aren't going so well to blame parents or get frustrated with parents. And while I understand that, I also don't necessarily think it's really fair or accurate. And that's what I want to talk about today. And the whole purpose for me for today's live stream is not to offend anybody, but really to challenge the thinking in the child and adolescent mental health field about how can you be more effective with children to help bring about change, which is going to require you to really think about parents and think about parents' involvement maybe in a different way. Some of you may already be involving parents, and some of you may be maybe more the traditional, the way I was trained too when I got into the mental health field with play therapy. In the mental health field, though, I started out with a focus on family. When I started training in play therapy and really learning how to do that, that's when it went back more to a singular focus with the children. And I got frustrated with that process and tried to figure out a way of integrating parents more because that felt more effective to me. And I could see so much more benefit for the children long term. So that's what I want to talk about today. If you are joining me live today, go ahead and post your name in the comments. Where are you from? What population do you work with? What questions do you have? What are some of the experiences that you've had in maybe engaging parents more in the process, and how do you build that rapport with them, the benefits of that? Go ahead and post your name in the comments where you work, post that information in the comments. Any questions you have, if you're watching on the replay, go ahead and post your name in the comments where you work as well. What population do you work with? So I'm Kathy Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a registered play therapist supervisor with about 30 years experience in the mental health field. And like I said, prior to that, I worked in the special education arena with my bachelor's degree and then my first job out of college, working with children with emotional problems in the special education system. And this was back in the 80s. So we had a self-contained classroom in a self-contained program, and I worked with elementary age kids. So I love using play therapy and expressive arts. I was introduced to it in the 80s, figured out how to get that training for myself in the early 2000s when I was finally able to find somebody to teach me how to do it. And so one of the things that I love doing is helping the next generation of child and adolescent therapists coming up into the field, or maybe you're in a second career, and you're passionate about helping children and adolescents. One of the things that I love doing is teaching you how to use play therapy and expressive arts with your child and adolescent clients. And over the years, I've kind of figured out some effective ways of doing that. And I love using family systems. I love using a neuroscience and attachment lens to understand clients, and so I love sharing that and helping you move along maybe a little faster than I did in the in the in the field. So I go live every Wednesday at 7 a.m. on LinkedIn in my Facebook group, Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground for mental health professionals working with children and adolescents and families using play therapy and expressive arts. And I also go live on YouTube. So if you find this information helpful, please feel free to share it across your social media platforms and like this episode, and feel free to comment. Alrighty, so here's the thing. If you're, like I said, most of the my colleagues, when we get in conversation, I'm always interested to know what other people are doing. Plus, I'm so nerdy that way. I love hearing what people are doing. And what I found is and I do a lot of supervision too. I have an online supervision group that I do. I also do a lot of trainings now. I do the online trainings for mental health professionals. And one of the things I hear regularly is frustration with parents and also feeling burnt out. I have worked with so many child and adolescent therapists who are also feeling really burned out. And when I explore a little bit further into what's going on, what are you feeling burnt out about? What are your struggles with engaging parents and frustration with parents? What I find is there's not really a plan. There's not really a plan of how to engage parents. And what I find is the plan is usually the maybe the every week when they bring their child the 5 minutes, never 5 minutes, check in. I call that drive through parent sessions. There's these drive through parent sessions where you're talking in front of the child, maybe in the waiting room if nobody's around, or you bring them into your office for the last 5 minutes. And while that may work for some really highly motivated, highly functioning parents who don't really need much guidance, that's not, it's not been my experience that works well with the vast majority of other parents who professionals are getting frustrated with. And there's a much more effective way to do it where you get much better treatment outcomes and you are less burned out. I can't tell you how many times I have this conversation um, with people in the field, especially people that I meet with during trainings and supervision. there's a more effective way to do it that gets parents more engaged. It gets your client better treatment outcomes, and you are less burned out. And that requires an intention about what is your purpose for having parents involved or caregivers. When I say parents, I mean adults in a caregiving role. So sometimes that's grandparents, sometimes that's foster parents, sometimes that's other guardians who are raising the child. So, first and foremost, what's your purpose for having parental involvement? Because until you get clear about that, you're not necessarily gonna be able to figure out what you need to do. And for me, this really brings us to that idea of really, I don't know, some of you may have flashbacks to graduate school. What's the role of the therapist? First and foremost, what is the role of the therapist? The role of the therapist is to conceptualize what are the roots of the problem. So, what's causing the problem? And then, once I figure out what's going on and I know what's likely, because we don't always know in the beginning, what's likely causing problems that's creating this distressing mental health situation, behaviors, um, then I next go into, okay, so what's the plan? What needs to happen in order to get your client from beginning, middle, and successfully completing treatment? That's that case conceptualization from to get them from A to Z, so to speak. Because I like to tell clients that I work with, the parents, my job is to work myself out of a job. What that means is my job is to help you figure out what's going on and help you get better so that you don't need to come anymore. That's the goal. And so part of that decision making is who needs to be involved in the treatment process and how. How do they need to be involved in the treatment process? And as therapists, I really think it's important to make sure we have client engagement. So when you're working with children and adolescents, you want to make sure that you are integrating, giving voice to the child and to the parents. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is we want to hear what they want to be better. And I'll usually ask the question, what do you want to be better by coming and what will that look like? And for me, that forms the basis of the treatment plan because I want to know why they're coming and what it looks like to them when things are better. As part of that process, though, so they're telling me what they want, what's going on, what's bothersome, what's troublesome, and what would it look like when things are better. In my mind, I'm formulating, okay, so in order to help them get this outcome, this, and this needs to happen. That's my role. And the way the I love a good Yoda metaphor, a Star Wars metaphor. So you're Yoda. You're Yoda. You know what it takes to get Luke Skywalker all the way through to being that Jedi master that he wants to be. In order to do that, you're figuring out who needs to be involved and how they need to be involved. So if it's children and adolescents that you're working with, how are parents going to be involved? Are parents able to be involved? Because there are some nuances in which you may have to be really intentional and clear and selective about which parent can be involved. Maybe there's addiction in the family, and one parent is in an active addiction, and one parent is not. That's a challenging family situation. And how are you, as the therapist, going to navigate that? How are you going to make that decision about who can be involved and how can they be involved? Um, so that's first and foremost. What's the role of the therapist? Because you're the one who you're Yoda. You're going to be the one helping Luke, your clients, get to be get better, to be that Jedi master, to go out into the world and be resilient and navigate the ups and downs and be successful and find in DBT they'll will will say find that life worth living. That's what your role is, to help them do that. And so what that requires is therapists to build trust with parents, because in order to and the more challenging the family, the higher the acuity, meaning they have generational histories of trauma, addiction, attachment, most likely these are the higher acuity families, then it's going to take time to build that trust with them. It's going to take time to really understand all the little nuances of that family system and how are all of these factors playing a role in what's going on with your child or adolescent client. And the thing is, children don't, they're not their therapeutic agents of change, meaning they aren't the ones who can facilitate the systemic changes that often need to occur. So the older the child, sure, as they're getting closer, maybe 16, 17, 18 years old, I would even say a 16-year-old's got limited capacity to do that, and yet more so than maybe a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old child. So the younger the child, the less likely they are to have the capacity to facilitate change systemically in their lives. And they need their caregivers to help them to do that. They need their caregivers to co regulate their emotions and help them through their different developmental stages to create a good sense of self, to develop resiliency that's going to help them be successful in life. So, first and foremost, really, you have to build that relationship, that therapeutic rapport with parents or caregivers as much as you do with the child. And the reason you need to do that is to build trust with them means they need to understand that you're not judging them, that you are not going to make them do things that they don't agree with, because when parents come, basically, many of them feel like they're failures. Like, I wasn't able to get it done for my child, and so now I need to get help. And maybe that's changing a little bit now with mental health being much more talked about. The thing is, as a parent, though, the likelihood they're feeling kind of guilty about that, or maybe even it's activated their shame, they're going to feel uncomfortable really getting much more involved in the change process and opening up and being vulnerable with you as well. So that's going to take time. And you want to build that trust with them, because if you're going to be asking them to make changes that make them uncomfortable, they're only going to do that if they have that relationship with you, if they feel like you're not judging them, if they feel like they can trust you, if they feel like you actually know what you're saying, and if you're asking them to do something that makes no sense to them and is really uncomfortable for them, they'll do it if they trust you. They'll do it if they have that therapeutic relationship with you. And so, in order to do that, you've got to have an intentional plan to do that. And that does not happen in a 5 minutes at the end of the session. Typically, unless you have a really super, super, super motivated, really high functioning parent, that doesn't typically happen. Typically, it requires that you build that rapport. And in order to do that, you have to meet with parents regularly, and build that rapport with them. Typically, at least in the beginning, it's usually with when you're not having the child in the session as well, to give you that freedom to be able to discuss things that may not necessarily be helpful for the child to hear. So, first and foremost, as the therapist, it is your responsibility to build that rapport with parents as much as it is the child, because the parent is the therapeutic agent of change, and they'll change if they have that relationship with you. And that's really, really, really important. Um, and then the thing is, if you're if you're facilitating that therapeutic rapport, that facilitates that environment, that safe space to create change. And in order to do that, you have to build that trust. And we're asking parents to be vulnerable. And so, in order to do that, they have to trust us. But once they do, they're more likely to work with you and to trust that the things that you're asking them to do are going to be beneficial, even though they don't necessarily understand it. And here's the thing: I love using family play therapy. And in order to, and getting parents more actively involved with their child in sessions. So to do that, they have to have that trust with you, which requires you have a plan and you understand why you need them involved and how that's going to work with the treatment process. Because then you're thinking about, okay, we need to do these kinds of things with the parent and maybe even the family in the session to facilitate that change. And having integrating parents into the play therapy process gives you so much information about the strengths of the parent child relationship, as well as maybe where they need to facilitate some change. And one of the things, because I am not real good with very structured program, so to speak. I created a framework based in attachment and neuroscience that uses family play therapy in order to help. Because I think it's important really to have a structure and a plan. Because to me, structure helps me make those decisions about what I need to do when. And for me, if I have a structure, I need for it to be grounded in theory, because theory drives application and helps me know what the phases of the treatment are and what needs to happen in each of those phases for that change process. Because what we're doing is we're about the job of facilitating change, and it can be painful and uncomfortable change. So we need to have some kind of um, framework that is grounded in theory and informed by research to make sure that what we're doing is going to be effective and it's also ethical. And so I created an attachment based family play therapy model that uses the theory of attachment and research, and uses that research about what works and what doesn't work. And to me, what how that helped was when I got parents and kids, getting the siblings in there. I can't tell you how many times that I have uh, finally convinced parents, because I have the relationship with them. They trust me. I have the plan of action that needs to happen so I can articulate to them, here's why we need to do it. Here's the benefit it will bring about to help you get that goal that you want to get. So I get them in there, takes a couple of sessions, but I can't tell you how many times the very first session or within the first 3 or 4, having the whole family in there and seeing all the interactions and the dynamics gave me so much more information about what was going on. And then I could be a lot more effective helping them to accomplish their goals. So I am a huge fan of family play therapy. And I like to use my attachment focused family play therapy model because I like the flexibility to kind of navigate, yet still having a framework in order to do that. So that's an important part of the process. You first and foremost, how are you conceptualizing treatment? Secondly, uh, how are you building that rapport with parents? And then thirdly, how are you using that process to facilitate the change process? So that is it for the today. Um, so also just a recap, which I kind of already did the recap, but I'll go through it one more time. Just really the role of the therapist is you are the one you're Yoda. You are helping Luke Skywalker, your clients, become that successful person that they want to be. So you have to understand how that process works, who needs to be involved and why. And then once you've done that, which that kind of happens over time, and you're kind of constantly in that mode. And initially, though, one of the very first things you need to be working on is developing that trust with parents to help them understand the importance of their role in the treatment process and then helping them to engage. And they won't engage unless they trust you. And in order to do that's how then you can go about facilitating that change with them, kind of partnering with them through that process and using parents more intentionally in the play therapy process to facilitate change. So parent child, you can with an attach one of the things I liked about an attachment and family therapy framework, because I love attachment theory. The limitations for me were that it was only typically, if you use an attachment model, it's typically one parent and one child in there, which is awesome. And I have done that and very beneficial. The thing is, I really want to see the child within context. I wanted more people in there, or I wanted different parts of the system in there to figure out who needed to be involved, what change needed to happen, how was that going to happen. So having the whole family in there, or just maybe even having siblings, or maybe both parents and a child, or maybe one parent and one child. Or so the flexibility really allowed me to do that decision making to meet more of the individual needs of the parents. So, and that's part of the change process. So that is it for today. And if you're interested, I do have a training coming up in May, on May 21st. It is called Attachment Focused Play Therapy. And basically, I teach you my model so that you can use it with parents. You can use the structure, um, and and we talk about the phases of treatment, different kind of interventions that you can use in each phase of the treatment, because that's one of the things that I found when I've been supervising people is how to know what kind of intervention to use when. Also, how do you use video for the process, using videotaping the sessions with permission to one, it's a great teaching tool with parents, because in this model, you're going to be teaching parents attachment focused play there. I mean, sorry, based parenting skills. So you're going to be teaching them different kind of parenting skills using an attachment and neuroscience lens. So to do that using video is really helpful that way. Um, so if you're interested in the training, there is an early bird registration. So if you register before midnight Pacific time on April 23rd, there is a 20% discount. There's two versions. There's a version where you can get continuing education credits, and there's a version where you don't. And when I say version, I mean payment options. So it's the same training. It's one training on May 21st, but there are two payment options. If you don't need the CEs, then you can pay that option. If you do want the CEs, then there's another payment option for that. It is a full day training, so you're going to get a lot of interventions to use as well. And if you have any questions about it, please feel free to message me. I'd be happy to get back to you about that. So you can check it out on my website, rrhcounseling.com/courses, and register before April 23rd and use this discount code at the checkout page. So I will see you next week. Bye.